You're not alone. Someone else who may well be hanging on our every word this morning from their two luxurious vessels cruising around the Great Barrier Reef would be a couple of espionage officers of the People's Liberation Army's top surveillance vessel, the Tianwang Jing, and its sister ship this morning, both which are sailing safely just outside our territorial waters with all the latest fancy electronic spying equipment. I wonder if they got Huawei to build it for them, in what has been described as a huge vacuum cleaning type activity to suck up everything in the electromagnetic spectrum and the ether to seek out from it what the Chinese can about our capabilities. Well, good luck with that. If you can find any military capabilities, please let us know. And I'm only half joking. As the Tianwang Jing sailed through the Torres Straits, they would have spotted this site, which is, of course, our very scary army headquarters up there on Thursday Island. And they probably took a couple of snaps of this lonely little vessel, which is pretty much all that stands between us and, well, this. While they're in our neck of the woods, I'm sure these two Chinese surveillance vessels wouldn't have missed the opportunity to scoop up some of our Australian cultural activities, in particular those provided at taxpayer expense by our state-sponsored broadcaster, the ABC. You know, they might even hoover up out of the ether a few examples of modern Australian national pride and inspiring cultural activities such as these.
I think violence is okay. Yeah,
I think this is really
good stuff.
Sovereignty was never ceded. A birth, Whitey, on your colonisation.
Or perhaps they might suck out of the electromagnetic atmosphere gems from the ABC telling Australians that they are all racists and homophobes. And no doubt they will be reassured to learn that our children are absolutely terrified for their future, but not because of the belligerent totalitarian communist regimes snooping about off our shores, but rather the Ching Chang Wing Chang surveillance team will no doubt be highly amused to learn that our kids are terrified that the planet is going to disappear in 11 years' time.
I think we deserve to live in a country that is 100% renewable, and I'm so concerned with the fact that if they're not going to change anything, then what's going to happen to humankind? What's going to happen to the whole world if no one does anything?
In 11 years' time, we're not going to be able to reverse all of this.
And no doubt our Chinese spies will have had a field day translating this bit of headline news in the Australian ether this morning. The Tasmanian Anti-Discrimination Commissioner Sarah Bolt has decreed that it is unlawful for lesbian events to exclude people with penises. But the primary reason for the Tianwang Jing and her sister ship prowling around our waters is, of course, for the Chinese Communist Party to spy on Talisman Sabre 2021, the Australian and US naval war games that are currently underway. They could have saved themselves the bother. This week, a scathing report was released by members of the US Congress showing that the US Navy is barely fit for purpose. And the reason? Identity politics. As Michael Smith comments on his excellent blog, the US Navy is in disarray and focusing more on diversity training than on warfare training. A report on the fighting culture of the United States Navy's surface fleet was released this week. It was prepared by retired Marine Lieutenant General Robert Schmidle and retired Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery, who conducted lengthy interviews with 77 current and retired naval officers on the promise of anonymity if they spilled the beans, which they most certainly did. One of the key issues raised by those interviewed was that today's US Navy leaders spend far more time focusing on diversity and inclusion training than they do on developing war-fighting capacity and key operational skills. You know the stuff. I've talked about it on this show often enough. Unconscious bias, LGBTIQ training, anti-racism, white privilege, nobody offend anybody else, don't call women guys, all of that rubbish. Let me quote from the report. One officer said, "I guarantee you every unit in the Navy is up to speed on their diversity training. I'm sorry that I can't say the same of their ship handling training." Another said, "It's criminal. They think my only value is as a black woman. But you cut our ship open with a missile and we all bleed the same colour," that officer said. Or this one from a destroyer captain who said, "Where the Navy allocates its time shows what its priorities are." Good point. He then goes on to say, "And we've got so many messages about X, Y, Z Appreciation Month or sexual assault prevention or you name it. We don't even have close to that same level of emphasis on actual war fighting." And this one from a lieutenant currently on active duty should cheer up our mates out there on the Tianwang-Jing no end. He said, "Sometimes I think we care more about whether we have enough diversity officers than if we'll survive a fight with the Chinese Navy." As I have repeatedly said, take your eye off the main game at your peril. But that's what every single one of our publicly funded institutions is now doing, from education right through to the top levels of the military. But here's where it gets even more worrying. The report also criticised cancel culture, the overly timid practice of treating certain errors with career termination and offering no opportunity for recovery. Sound familiar? Officers interviewed for the report claim that the practice of firing commanders for the tiniest infringements or mistakes is a major drag on retention, morale, and operational lethality. And they noted perceived fear among Navy leaders of anything negative, no, not weapons, but anything negative written about them in the newspaper. That's what they're scared of. What a joke. Indeed, former Secretary of the Navy John Lehman has pointed out that of the 4 key admirals who led the US Navy to victory in World War II, not a single one of them would probably make the rank of captain in today's fleet. And the reasons are simple enough. One of them drank too much. One was always bending the rules. One was a known womanizer, and so on and on. In other words, cancel culture and political correctness and identity politics are killing off the careers of many of America's finest military leaders, the ones we would need in any military confrontation. Still, I'm sure that the same problems inflicting the US Navy, well, they wouldn't be inflicting our own defense forces. I mean, our top brass clearly has its priorities right, and they're focused exclusively on the job at hand. I mean, it was only a few weeks ago, after all, that the Chief of Air Force, Air Marshal Mel Hupfeld, AO, DSC, excitedly informed our troops that from now on, the Air Force's cultural development program, known simply as Our Air Force, Our Culture, will be the most significant shift in thinking in years. And one of the key elements of this significant shift in thinking, announced by the Air Marshal back in April, is the transition from the words airman and airmen to a more inclusive collective noun, aviator. So glad we've got our priorities straight. I bet those Chinese espionage officers over there on the old Tianwang-Jing are quaking in their boots right now.